Good day. Before we proceed with this video, just a quick reminder that if you're watching any of our videos on Rumble, that's to say Alexander Mercouris, Alex Christoforou or Duran videos on Rumble, then if you go to the top of the video, you will see a red maroon button. If you press that red maroon button, it will take you directly to our locals homepage where you can join our locals community, become an active member if you so choose. And that will, of course, in turn entitle you to publish exclusive content on our locals homepage and also to participate in my Wednesday live streams. My live streams which take place exclusively on locals every Wednesday. Right, well, again, I'm afraid that today has to be this video today has to be dedicated to the Ukrainian crisis. But I would say, before I do this video, that the big news, the big event today is the French presidential election. Now, I'm not going to discuss that in any way in this video. The high probability is that you will already know the result of the first round by the time you watch this video. But of course, at the moment, all I know is that voting is underway and that at the moment, turnout appears to be slightly down. I'm not going to say more. I'm going to go straight into the rest of my discussion about the current events. But I would say that obviously when the first round result comes through, you can expect from me a proper discussion and analysis of it, and that will be clearly in my next video. Anyway, in the meantime, this will have to be a relatively short video because as today is a Sunday, news comes in dribs and drabs because many of the people who report it are on leave, and the result is that I'm not fully up to speed on everything that's happening. My overall impression from the battlefields is that the situation in the actual fighting in eastern Ukraine is intensifying. The Pentagon has said that there are now 40 Russian battalion groups operating in Ukraine. By the way, and this is a point that has been made by a number of people, the number of verified Russian battalion groups that have been operating in Ukraine since the start of the war has been far lower than the numbers touted by the US administration and much of the Western media in the lead up to the war. At times it's seen more like half, or indeed more often less than a third of the total number of Russian battalion groups that the administration and the intelligence community was saying had been deployed in and around Ukraine. And that has reinforced an opinion which I know an increasing number of people hold, that the total number of Russian troops who have been operating in Ukraine at any one time since the start of the war is well below that figure of 150,000 that was being circulated on the eve of the war. Now, obviously, I'm not in any position to confirm this. I would say that those Pentagon estimates anyway don't take into account the militia of the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, which is believed to number somewhere in the region of 50,000. And of course, in addition to the actual Russian combat troops who are operating in Ukraine, the Russian National Guard, the Rosgvardia organization, which deals mainly with internal security issues, is also now active in Ukraine, stabilizing or securing the position in the territory the Russians have captured, which is behind the front lines. Now, I have no idea how many of those troops are involved, but it does seem that some troops from the Rosgvardia organization are active in places like Mariupol, actually fighting Ukrainian troops there. And whilst I'm on the topic of Mariupol, I understand that the Chechen militia, which is leading much of the fighting in Mariupol, especially in and around the Azovstal factory, that the Chechen militia technically is part of the Rosgvardia organization, though I might be wrong about that. Anyway, to the extent that I can judge from the information, as I said, the Pentagon now says that 40 Russian battalion groups are now operating in eastern Ukraine. The Russians continue methodically to move south from Izium, apparently managed to cross an important river and secure a river crossing. And there was even a report, which may be premature, that advanced units of the Russian forces, presumably reconnaissance units, have been seen in the countryside around the two key remaining cities of Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, which are the main areas where the Ukrainian forces in the Donbass are now concentrating for what looks like their last stand. In Mariupol, by the way, the information is that with most of the port now secured, the Russians and their allies continue to push remaining Ukrainian troops, supposedly numbering around 3,000, towards the Azovstal factory. There's reports, increasing numbers of reports, by the way, that there's several hundred troops, what the Russians call foreign mercenaries, located in the Azovstal factory. And it is these people that the Ukrainians have been trying to evacuate from Mariupol. I would say that there was a very bizarre episode reported by the Russians yesterday, one which makes me even more baffled as to what exactly there is in the Azovstal factory. Because with all attempts to evacuate personnel by air from Azovstal having now been abandoned, the Ukrainians very extraordinarily sent a Maltese-flagged, Ukrainian-owned dry cargo ship towards Mariupol, apparently with the intention of trying to take these people out of the Azovstal factory by ship. Well, the vessel was apparently blocked by the Russian Navy. It apparently published a very bizarre call sign. Allegedly, this is entirely what the Russians are saying. The call sign was "I am a maniac," which seems really to add to the absurdity of the whole affair. I would like to say absurdity were it not for the fact that people's lives are at risk, are in jeopardy. But anyway, the whole thing seems beyond bizarre to me. And anyway, the dry cargo ship was eventually fired upon by the Russian Navy as it refused to obey instructions to turn back. And eventually the firing caused a fire and the ship had to stop. And eventually it was boarded by Russian Navy personnel, or at any rate made to turn round, and is now being ferried to a Russian port, where I presume the Ukrainian crew will be subjected to some pretty intense questioning. I suppose, or presume, that these are highly trained people, and no doubt they will resist providing information under interrogation. But if that is right, then that in a sense adds even further another layer of mystery to this whole thing, because it's not just helicopters that Ukraine has been losing in its increasingly desperate attempts to rescue somebody from the Azovstal works, but it's also losing what I suspect are some of its best, most valuable, most highly trained personnel. So the whole thing is extremely strange. And of course, the Runet, the Russian internet, is full of speculation as to who is in the Azovstal steelworks. The Russians have said that they picked up transmissions from the steelworks which point to Westerners, or at least foreigners, being there. The Russians talk about these people as being mercenaries. Now, I'm not going to speculate too much on who these people are or what these people are. One observation I would make, and it really is information that I learnt from before the war, is that the Azov battalion, as I will still call it, did attract from around the world all sorts of people who shared its ideological beliefs and who saw in it a cause that they wanted to join and they wished to fight for. So it could be that these transmissions, these radio signals that the Russians are picking up, are not from any NATO personnel sent to Mariupol. They might just be volunteers, people from Western countries who now find themselves trapped, who find that this great adventure in Ukraine is not turning out quite as they're expected, and it may be that really their presence has no connection to these evacuation attempts. This is not even a guess, it's just a reminder of certain facts about the Azov battalion that we knew about. We mustn't assume that these transmissions in Western languages necessarily point to the presence of NATO personnel in Mariupol or at the Azovstal works. And it may be that these are not actually the people that the Ukrainians are trying to evacuate. The Russians always say that the people who the Ukrainians are trying to evacuate are the commanders of the Azovstal battalion, who one would presume were Ukrainians. Now, if that is true, then all I would say is that would suggest that the Azov battalion and its affiliated organizations wield enormous leverage in Ukraine, so much leverage that they can apparently oblige the Ukrainian authorities to commit some of their few remaining helicopters and some of their best personnel to get the most valuable people of the Azov battalion out of Mariupol. And this reminds me of a rumour, and I want to stress this was only a rumour, that Alex Christoforou and I discussed about 2 weeks ago, which said that there were some rumblings in Kiev about a possible coup based on a betrayal on the part of the Kiev government of the Azov fighters in Mariupol and the defeat of the Ukrainian army in Donbass. Now, I want to stress this was only a rumour, and because it was a rumour, we didn't discuss it at that time because, generally speaking, we don't like to talk about rumours in our programmes. But given, as I said, these remarkable efforts to get these people, whoever they are, out of the Azovstal works, the willingness of the Ukrainian authorities to sacrifice valuable personnel and equipment, I wonder whether the reason for that isn't that these people, whoever they are, carry enormous political weight in Kiev and that the Zelensky government is in some way afraid of abandoning them. Well, these are just speculations. I want to stress again, they're only speculations. I'm going to move on now and look at what's going on elsewhere. As I said, we see a tightening of the battle in Donbass. It's increasingly clear that the Ukrainians are not going to be able to hold on for long in Donbass. We had a visit to Kiev by Boris Johnson, the British Prime Minister, who met with Zelensky there. It was all a hurriedly arranged secret visit. We don't really know very much of what was discussed, but I'm going to make a guess that Johnson once again stressed to Zelensky the importance of making no concessions to the Russians, somewhat to the disquiet of some Western governments, including the British, despite all the claims about war crimes, which we've been hearing over the last few days. Zelensky and his people have been insisting that they will continue to negotiate with the Russians, saying they have no choice but to do that. And I get the sense that the British government, at least, is not happy with that. And I suspect that the American government isn't vastly happy with that either. What they want to see is victory over the Russians in Ukraine, something which is unachievable, but which perhaps they hope will lead to a prolongation of the war, major losses for the Russians in Ukraine, or leading to a collapse of the political system in Russia. None of that, in my opinion, has any basis in reality. My own view is that the longer the war goes on, always assuming that the Western powers don't themselves intervene directly in the war, but my own view is that the longer the war goes on, the more damage will be done to Ukraine, and at its conclusion, the stronger Russia will be. Now, I'm going to make here what I suspect is going to be a very controversial observation, but it's always seemed to me that wars that end in what appear to be quick victories are never, in fact, really ended. Those quick victories always turn out to be transitory. And on the contrary, it is victories that are grinding and real and which may take a while to achieve that are ultimately the really conclusive ones. And if you want proof of this, look at the three wars that the Western powers have fought over the last 10 years or so, 20 years or so. Firstly, Afghanistan, then Iraq, then Libya. In each case, there was a victory which the Western powers claimed that they had won within a few weeks or months of the starting of these campaigns. Actually, it's worth pointing out that these campaigns actually lasted rather longer than the Western powers would like to remember today. But anyway, there were pretty quick victories. The reality of those victories is that the vast majority of the people the Western powers were fighting were not actually defeated or destroyed. They simply dispersed into the countryside. And then when things began to change, they re-entered the battle. Whereas long wars, which grind the enemy down, rarely leave any room for any sort of comeback. Again, a good example might be what happened at the end of the Second World War. At the end of the Second World War, towards the end of the Second World War, there was a lot of talk in Germany, picked up, by the way, in the Western media, of all kinds of operations by German insurgents that would continue to hold down the Western powers for years, even decades, after the end of the Second World War. The reality was that in 1945, Germany's defeat was so total that there was no prospect at all of anything like that happening. And I suspect the same is going to prove to be true in Ukraine. In fact, it's been my consistent view that the hopes of an insurrection, of a guerrilla war against the Russians, are completely far-fetched. All the information suggests that nothing like that is happening in the territories that the Russians control, that it is only the Ukrainian army that the Russians are fighting, and that any attempt to try and organize insurgencies or partisan wars in the territories that the Russians have captured, assuming that they're even happening, that none of that is actually taking place in any real way. Anyway, whilst we are on the subject of the Second World War, I find it most interesting that the United States has now said that it's going to enter into some sort of lend-lease arrangement with Ukraine. This is a dusting off of an idea that extends back to the Second World War, when countries like Britain, which needed weapons and needed them from the United States, which is the only country able at that time to provide them, entered into what was called lend-lease arrangements with the United States. Now, by the way, another country that had lend-lease arrangements with the United States was the Soviet Union, Stalin's Soviet Union. Now, what I think that people don't quite realize about this is that it actually represents a shift in the terms of trade between the United States and Ukraine. It means, in effect, that Ukraine, to the extent that it's going to receive American weapons from now on, is no longer going to receive them for free. Because Lend-Lease, by definition, is not the gratuitous free transfer of arms. The British found themselves in heavy debt to the United States after the Second World War, and indeed they had to take out a massive loan in the 1940s, which they only paid off about 10 years ago, in order to roll over those loans that they took out with the Americans during the Second World War. And by the way, they also had to transfer to the United States a very large part of their gold reserves, including much of the gold that was in South Africa. And at that time, obviously, South Africa was part of the British Empire. And of course, the Soviets also paid for some of the weapons that they received from the United States in gold, a fact which isn't widely known today. But it's interesting that the United States seems to be gradually edging back towards doing that with Ukraine. One wonders how the United States expects the Ukraine ever to repay. After all, I've just been receiving news just before this program began that Ukraine's harvest will probably be only half what it was last year, and its export potential has crashed. Doesn't seem to me as if Ukraine is going to be in very much of a position to pay much of anything. And of course, given that Ukraine is going to need funds in order to rebuild after the war, owing money to the United States rather suggests that any money which is going to Ukraine will simply return back to the United States, or at least most of it will. Anyway, that's about that. In the meantime, I've been also seeing that the the CEO of Bosch, one of Germany's biggest industrial groups, an industrial group which, by the way, makes an awful lot more than just the kitchen equipment that many people are familiar with. It's a giant industrial group, has made it fairly clear that for his company, a cut-off of gas supplies from Russia would be a catastrophe. And he is also saying that if there is an extension of the sanctions war to China, that would be an even bigger catastrophe. And he's absolutely right. And one would like to believe that people in Germany are listening. I have to say that I think it is far too late for German industrial leaders to come out and talk in this way. I think that if they had done this 6 months ago, when the first glimmers of this crisis first appeared on the horizon, if they'd come out and said clearly and in unison that interruption of energy supplies from Russia would be a disaster for Germany and for Europe, if they'd impressed that fact upon the German electorate and also impressed that fact upon the incoming German government, if they'd spoken out over the course of February and March, when the first sanctions started to be unrolled, then there is a chance that they might have been listened to. Unfortunately, like most business people, they were extremely nervous about involving themselves openly in the political process, and I'm afraid that they are giving these warnings as at a time when I think the situation is now already to a great extent past the point of no return. As discussed by Alex Christoforou and myself in a program that we did on the Duran, discussing the latest security agreement between China and the Solomon Islands, I am afraid that we are now definitely on a ladder towards ever expanding sanctions escalation. I think that before very long, we will start to see Europe consciously cutting itself off from Russian gas and oil supplies. And I expect that within a relatively short time, we will see US and presumably EU sanctions being imposed against China, further disrupting supply chains, creating havoc in the world economy as the hardliners in Washington and Brussels and London continue with the process of escalation that they are now irrevocably committed to. That's what I believe, and that's what I expect to see over the next weeks and months and years. Now, today is the 10th day since the big hit that British households suffered with a huge surge in energy costs and mortgage costs that struck them at the beginning of this month. And I've been told by some retailers that I've been in contact with that there's already been an effect in food shops. I've also seen, by the way, that reports that British supermarkets are running out of products like sunflower oil. Well, they're the first indicators that that is true. Certainly, sunflower oil seems to have vanished from the supermarkets in my area. I think that the economic war is going to grind on. I firmly predict that we're going to be in for a major inflation shock that's going to undercut demand, and that will undoubtedly lead to a severe recession, stagflation. I don't think that the leaders of the West are in any mood or position to slow down. I think that we are now committed, and we're committed to a course which I'm afraid is going to lead us to very, very difficult outcomes. If there is an upset in the French election, which I am, by the way, not predicting, then that will only be the first indicator, the first sign of what is probably coming. But I would say that whatever the outcome of the French election is going to be, nobody should be under any illusions or retain any illusory hopes that anything now is going to get us off this runaway train that we're all trapped upon. Anyway, on that somewhat bleak note, I'm going to end this program. I predict, as I said, that we're going to see the Battle of the Donbass intensifying over the next few days. I believe that phase 2, by the way, is already to all intents and purposes underway. I think that Jens Stoltenberg's prediction that this is all weeks away is almost certainly wrong. I would not be surprised if we see moves made by the Russians towards Kharkiv and Nikolaev as well. All the indications are of substantial build-ups of forces, Russian forces, around those two cities. And in the meantime, it seems to me that the economic and political picture continues to grow darker. Well, thank you for joining me again today. I look forward to you joining me again today. I hope, by the way, that I'm wrong in some of those predictions that I've just made, but we'll see whether I'm right or not. In the meantime, I wish you a very good day, a very good day. I look forward to you joining me again soon. Remember, you can find us on other platforms, Rumble and Locals, as I discussed at the start of this program, but also various other platforms too. You can find links under this video. You can also support us if you wish via Patreon and Subscribestar. You can also go to our shop and buy the many wonderful things that you will find there. And also, please don't forget to tick that like button if you like this video.